Welcome to this webinar. My name is Neil Wilkins, and we're here today at Cambridge Marketing College to talk about managing stakeholders and internal expectations. And my word, this is something I didn't get right early in my career, assuming that everybody thought like I did. Everybody had the same goals that I did, and everyone viewed the world in the same way as me. Clearly, that is not the case, and that is something we're going to explore, is the differences that we can welcome and celebrate in all of the different stakeholders that we need to work with as business professionals. This webinar is part of a fortnightly series every other week on a Friday. We come together to, well, celebrate some of the best bits within marketing and business through a topic of choice each fortnight. You can see the upcoming list of topics that we're going to be covering at marketingcollege.com/events, and we'll be continuing these through the rest of this year. But today we're here to talk about stakeholders. Now, I'm going to define these in quite some detail in just a short while, because it's really important that we understand what we actually mean by a stakeholder, and also the different internal expectations around our businesses. Because, as I said right at the start, not everybody views the world like you do or like I do. So we've really got to get sort of up close and personal with the people we need to influence, the people that we need to get on side for the kinds of activities that we're doing. So we're going to look at how to understand different stakeholder needs. We're going to look into managing competing priorities, and we all know those exist in most businesses right now, and also to communicate progress clearly. This is something that is absolutely key if you're looking to build great relationships with your stakeholders. So we're going to help everyone listening to this or watching this to handle the people side of delivery. You know, a lot of us know how to run campaigns and projects and build new products and services, but this is all about the communication side internally. And we're going to look into what matters most and who matters most to enable us to deliver our work. We're going to look at what each stakeholder needs. And of course, their needs are going to be very different to ours. And that's going to be a little bit of a theme as we go through this. We're going to explore how decisions will be made as part of the ongoing interaction with others in our organizations, how we're going to communicate progress, and how any, well, I guess, inevitable risks and tensions can be managed. So there's a lot of kind of upside to doing this, but there's also a lot of potential negatives or challenges that we need to overcome. So this hopefully will be a win-win for everybody involved. So stakeholder management really does matter in marketing. You know, all of our work, not just little pieces of our work, but all of our work is shaped by others in the business. That's colleagues, managers, sales teams, product teams, finance, legal, agencies, probably HR, operations, other comms or customer support, and of course our clients and our customers. And it could go outside of the organization to those close to us. So if we have, you know, third parties, so it could be a web company, it could be design agency, all the way through to our resellers. If we go out through a chain of distribution, if you like, to get our products and services out to our customers, all of these are stakeholders. And delays, reworking, and any kind of friction that we see in the work that we do often comes from gaps in expectation rather than poor marketing ideas. You know, if you're anything like me, you can start to then kind of look at yourself and look at the work you're doing and think, okay, maybe this wasn't actually quite good enough. Maybe I needed to improve it. Whereas actually, it might have been great work. It just wasn't communicated through a stakeholder engagement that meant something to them. That's where we're going to go with this. Because strong stakeholder management really will help you to improve alignment. It'll certainly generate trust with those you engage with and the quality of the delivery of your products, services, and campaigns. You know, early and regular stakeholder engagement with any of those individuals or departments is going to improve the outcome, because it means that everybody understands what's going on, but they also get why we collectively need to be doing things. So we can start to put this whole kind of stakeholder thing into our planning and into the delivery of everything we do. Even if, as a marketer, you think, well, I can just get on with this and do it myself. Well, you can, but the impact of everything we do generally goes far and wide in the business. So it's really important to tee that up effectively so that we don't see friction coming a little bit further down the tracks. So when we say stakeholder, I think it's really important, particularly for those of you who the word stakeholder is either a little ambiguous or it's kind of a new concept to you. So a stakeholder is quite clearly actually anyone who can affect or be affected by or see themselves as affected by the work that you're doing. Okay, so if you can have an impact on somebody because of what you do, they are a stakeholder. Now, you might not think of them as a stakeholder, but if they feel they're a stakeholder, then they are too. So it kind of qualifies from both directions. So you can decide if it's a senior leader, maybe a budget holder, maybe owners of the products or services. You might have a product team that isn't part of marketing, for example, legal teams, sales teams, agencies, end users, whatever this happens to be. If you feel they're a stakeholder, then they are, because what you do affects them. But also looking backwards, if they position themselves as affected by what you do, then they are a stakeholder too. So think of it from their perspective as much as from yours. That's really important. So they could be individuals, they could be groups, they could be organizations who are affected or may affect or perceive themselves to be affected by any decisions or outcomes or projects you're working on. Okay, so actually, when you start thinking about it in these terms with that definition, it could be a lot of people. It could be a lot of individuals. And of course, the more you think about this, the more potentially complicated it is because they're all actually quite different. I mean, if you were to think of them as individual personas, so you actually give them a definition, describe them, build their biography, you'd look through all of those different descriptions and you'd probably be thinking, actually, they're very varied. There are some senior people, there are some who are a little bit more junior, there are some who know exactly what we do and we've integrated our work with them before, and there are others who are really kind of outliers. There are others that maybe have a sort of a passing interest and others who are deeply and profoundly affected by the work that we do. So there's a real mixture here, and that is the point. When we look at managing stakeholders and their expectations, it's complicated. It is. This is not a simple thing to do. So what we need to do is kind of try and sort of break this down and basically really understand, get a deep understanding of kind of what's going on in each of their collective or individual circumstances. What are the kind of relationships that they're looking to form with us? Because it might be to their benefit. Hopefully it will be. So we need to kind of really step into their shoes. And you could start to think of the way I'm describing this is that it's almost like they're customers of marketing. And actually, it's true, they are, because, we need to serve them with information, probably with other stuff as well. So they need to understand it, buy into it, and respond appropriately. That's like a customer. So actually thinking of your stakeholders as though they're customers probably puts the right kind of mindset into that. And as I'm saying this, I'm thinking, wow, how wrong did I get this back in the day? Some of my earlier roles in marketing when I actually was working for brands and companies, I got this so wrong. I just made assumptions. I just assumed that everybody would get the language I was talking. They'd understand what marketing is and does. And of course, they didn't and they don't. And so things became a little bit sketchy. I'm being kind. Things got difficult and complicated because if you don't take this seriously, if you don't understand it from their perspective, you're very likely to tread on toes and get things wrong. So I'm putting my hand up here and saying I didn't really back in the day get this very right at all. And I really do mean at all. I made some really big blunders. But I've kind of learned, and I've learned how to play, you could argue, I guess, a little bit more of a political game in more recent years, and it kind of takes time. But there are some really key theoretical approaches you can take. And basically what it does is it starts to give you a structure, allows you to kind of organize your thinking into the different kinds of relationships that you have. There are different sort of styles of relationships. Some are important to you, and some are kind of like less important, less influential. So we need to kind of work these things out. I'm going to talk about stakeholder mapping in just a minute. For those of you who are thinking, I know where he's going. Yes, I am. We will talk about that. But just for now, we kind of just need to almost step into our stakeholders' worlds, really. I mean, they may well have hidden expectations about the speed, the visibility, the quality, the control that they need in that relationship, or the understanding of what you're doing. So thinking of it from their perspective is kind of, well, what does marketing look like to them? How do they define marketing? What do they actually see marketing as? Because that could be at odds with the way you define it. And that's going to be some things to sort there. And if we certainly see this kind of role clarity, the kind of updates of information about what you're doing, how you're progressing a campaign or a project or a new product introduction into a new market, this might have a profound impact on their work, how much, bandwidth or resource they need to support what you're doing. And if you keep this as a closely guarded secret, that is going to become a little uncomfortable for others who are going to be impacted by it. So what we don't want to do is leave any stone unturned. What we don't want to do is kind of keep things hidden. This is about transparency and authenticity and honesty and maybe at times a little bit of vulnerability. So that people can understand that actually you're a marketer, but you're human. You're not kind of telling people how to do things. What you're doing is you're encouraging collaboration and working together. Some of these kinds of expectations, then, if you set these as the goals early on, can be a great way of unlocking some of those sort of unwritten challenges that kind of really get in the way of a good relationship. So often this stuff really starts with, building a picture of who we're actually talking to and what's in it for them. Now, there is a very specific theory here, and it's a task really that I would suggest is number one thing that you do is to map your stakeholders. I described at the start of this, some of the kind of job descriptions or the roles or the kinds of supporting departments, teams, or organizations who might be stakeholders for you. But then the first thing to do is start to map them because not each one has the same level of influence in the relationship they have with you. Not each one has the same level of interest in what you're doing. Some will be absolutely interested because their role is absolutely impacted by what you do. Others will be kind of outliers, as I mentioned earlier. So they're vaguely interested. They need to kind of understand what's going on, but maybe they're not that bothered because it doesn't really affect them. So what we're saying is not every stakeholder looks, sounds, feels, or acts in the same way, but they also have different levels of value in this relationship they are going to want to have with you. So what you can do is you can map your stakeholders. So if you want to do this properly, you can sort of research Mendelow's stakeholder mapping, and it'll basically encourage you to map each stakeholder by how much influence they have, maybe score it from 1 to 10, and how much interest what they have in the outcome of the interaction with you. So it's influence and interest. And then you can plot those things from a scale of 1 to 10 in each of those two categories. You can plot those on a graph. And then you can start to see which stakeholders have high levels of influence or power and a high interest in the relationship. And then you can start to see some that are high power, but actually low interest, and others that have kind of low power but high interest. So they just kind of want to keep a watch on you, but actually they're not that sort of significant to you. And of course, there will be others that are low power and low interest. So they don't have much influence, but they also don't have particularly high interest, but they are still a stakeholder. Now, what does that naturally do? If you then see these stakeholders in this stakeholder map in 4 different segments or boxes, you can then start to prioritize. And that's the key. Because I started out here by saying, probably if you start to list all of your stakeholders, there are going to be a lot. But by using something like Mendelow's stakeholder mapping, you can then start to see there are a lot, But actually, there are only a few here in this high interest, high influence category. So these become then my priorities because we've only got a limited time and resource and bandwidth in every day. So therefore, we've got to make sure we're attending to the most important stakeholders. The others we're not ignoring, we're just not putting quite such the same level of priority against them. So we will talk to them. We'll find out ways of, having a relationship there and keeping them updated and doing all the right stuff, but they're not quite as important as the highest priority ones. That's key. Now, once you kind of do that, you'll see that maybe actually you've still got too many in the high power, high influence box. So what you might want to do is you might want to add what we call a salience model into this and kind of look at a little bit more detail and start to think about, how much power do they kind of really have in what I'm trying to achieve here? So this could be a campaign delivery or it could be a product launch. And what legitimacy do they have? And what kind of urgency is there also in this communication we're going to have with them? This is useful when someone lacks hierarchy, for example, but still needs attention because their issue is valid or urgent. So it allows you then to kind of really shape that priority list of stakeholder maps in terms of the high level of influence and interest, but then maybe sub prioritize. If you've got a list of, say, 10 or 12 people in that high and high category, you can then sub prioritize those down based on how urgent the communication is with them and how legitimate it is and their level of power. Because then what it does is it enables you then to really go after maybe the top three. Because if you had a very limited time, you would only go after and start to develop communications and updates and reporting and maybe a collaboration team with those that are the really highest priority ones. And for some of us, it isn't that complicated, and maybe you don't want to go this level of detail. But if you're in a complex organization where there's a lot of cross team and cross multidiscipline working, then that salience model can just be that next level down to help you to prioritize. Now, once you've got your prioritized list of stakeholders, the next thing to do is to build a stakeholder one pager. So it doesn't actually have to be a one pager, but it needs to be something that allows you to kind of really sort of start to plot out what you are going to deliver and what is interesting to them. So you can start to use this properly strategically. And this will be something that's potentially a one-time activity because once you know it, you know it. But it's a great activity to do when you're starting out in this stakeholder mapping approach. So what you want on your stakeholder, and of course it's one for each one, is their role, what success looks like to them. And again, that might be something you want to ask. You don't want to actually presume, because that's quite important. What they worry about. So, what are their biggest challenges? What are they concerned with? What do they doubt? What vulnerabilities do they see? That could also be a really interesting one. What decision power do they hold? In other words, how properly influential are they? Are they a sponsor? Are they an influencer rather than actually a decision maker, for example? So you can again maybe rate them on a scale if that's appropriate to you. And also, really importantly, on this one pager, how do they prefer to receive information? And that probably goes down to an individual level. So if you're talking here on this one pager as a team, for example, so maybe you're building a one pager for your customer service team. It might not be the team you're talking about here. It could be customer service manager, or it could be a team leader, or again, you'll know the roles, you'll know the kind of level you need to go to. But if there are differences across individuals within a team and you're building this one pager for a team, then probably break that down into, well, person A, prefers information like this, person B wants it like this, because then you're starting to interact and communicate on their terms. Now, this might mean you've got to go out of your preference, but it is so worth it. If somebody wants a once a week phone call, quick catch up, and somebody else wants a quick little email bullet pointed update, then if you can serve them in those ways, you're doing it on their terms. And that will build the relationship because they know you're taking them seriously. And of course, these are your priority stakeholders. So they would be the ones that it is worth investing this extra little bit of time and energy with. Now, it's also as you're starting to do this and you start to have these interactions, it's very, very easy to think, oh my Lord, I know I'm busy enough. And well, thanks, Neil. You just give me a load of extra work to do. And some of these stakeholders, when I start to kind of talk to them and ask them these questions, they start to become a little bit like a blocker. They're kind of really hard to tie down. They're a bit difficult or unhelpful. They may be disengaged. Maybe they don't see the value in what I'm trying to do here. Or maybe it's just a little bit political. I can't talk to that person, so I have to talk to somebody else before they'll give me their time, blah, blah, blah. Avoid any unhelpful labels at this point. Okay, because what happens then is we fall into that trap of prioritizing based on actually who we like to work with and actually who's more fun to work with and actually who's easiest to deal with rather than the true stakeholder mapping that we did objectively at the start. So I'm not saying you can't bring life and your preferences and who you actually like working into this. Maybe you do, but maybe that's just a secondary thing. Try if you can to keep an open mind, avoid any kind of sort of negative labels like, oh yeah, that's the really difficult team, or oh, person A or person B, oh, they're just hard to work with. Because as soon as you start to do that, you shut down the opportunities of building the relationship. They might be acting in that way because of people before you have not done this, and they maybe haven't been taken seriously, or maybe they feel they've been undervalued in their relationship with marketing or with others in the business, so they've become a bit cynical, skeptical, and a little bit negative. So just because they're initially behaving like that does not mean that's it for the life. You can turn these things around. So try and stay positive to neutral in setting this up, and just give them the benefit of the doubt, because that will avoid unhelpful labeling, which is going to restrict you. That shuts things down from the get-go. So start to just kind of really open up an opportunity to maybe improve everyone and everywhere. That's the key thing. And what you're kind of probably sensing here is that one thing I'm looking to do here is to encourage you to clarify objectives before discussing tactics. In other words, maybe collaborating on what do we want to achieve in this relationship, or this project I'm working on. I want to tell you about it because it's going to impact you. What would you kind of like to know? What's a good outcome if we were to work together on this? And maybe be super clear on your goals, because if you're not clear about what you're trying to achieve, that can create conflicting expectations, because they'll make assumptions, much as you might have made assumptions or your predecessors made assumptions about the relationship that you have with that person or that team. Maybe they're going to make assumptions around you as well. So they will only really align if they understand, again, this is this honesty and authenticity and transparency. If they understand your intended outcome, the boundaries, any trade-offs, your resource limitations, maybe this kind of this ultimate dream or vision that you have for what you're doing, and maybe share with them this broader communication plan that starts with clear objectives aligned to the broader organization's goals. If you can share that, then they'll see, oh, right, okay. So this marketing campaign then isn't just to make you look good or do this brand awareness thing. And I don't even understand, because I'm not in marketing, what that means. They're actually then thinking, okay, so you're doing that because of that reason. And well, I've got to achieve some organization goals through me doing this over here. Oh, okay, well, I can see how those two things might be able to work together. So you're starting to open up this idea of creating some threads, maybe of joint working or joint thinking. Starts to get interesting when you open the door rather than just saying, this is how it is, this is how it's always been, so take it or leave it. And you start to actually begin to collaborate. Because through collaboration, you stand the chance of co-creation, of new stuff, interesting new stuff. By doing this early and defining kind of, who's going to do what, and, being really kind of clear on the roles that you have with your stakeholders and how you'd like them to be kind of part of stuff that you're doing, it starts then to get rid of clarity that is kind of going to, well, lack of clarity that's going to kind of almost sort of make quite foggy and misty with the direction that you're going in. So there's a very, very clear kind of sort of authority model here that's really practical one that you could start to use, which is driver, approver, contributor, or informer. So it allows you then to kind of almost set a stakeholder into one of those four categories and let them know as well why you want to talk to them, why you want them part of the project, or why you want to keep them updated. It's because either they're a driver, an approver, a contributor, or they need to be kept informed because of other impacts that might have later on this project within the business. And then what happens then is that they become then quite clear about their role. They understand, okay, well, I can hear what you're saying now about me being a stakeholder. And actually, I understand why you want to talk to me. And okay, maybe we'll build this over time. Maybe we can sort of get a little bit more deep in this relationship and build the collaboration between the two teams because actually we understand our roles now. And what it will do is it will set that level of expectation about kind of almost like a little mini job description of what's required. And it helps them to understand then how marketing and how their role fits into the bigger picture, the wider kind of stakeholder situation in the organization. And it might even encourage them to do a stakeholder map too, because it's not just marketing that can benefit from doing this. So it becomes quite interesting then if you start to do this early on, because it's quite strategic if you think about it. And what it does is it sets expectations explicitly at the start. It starts to then begin to see this kind of collaborative, definition of success. I mean, you can start to then say, look, if we work together on this, or if I keep you updated with this, this is how we could actually work together going forward. This is what success looks like from my perspective. What does it look like from yours? So again, keeping that door open of not preaching, but actually collaborating and discussing. It also then allows you to clarify what's in the scope because often people will jump to conclusions about actually what's going to be included, and they might have an inflated level of expectation about this project or campaign. And you might think, well, no, it wasn't that big. It was only this. We're only doing this over here. We don't actually need all of that yet. And they were like, oh, right. Okay. Well, I just assumed. Of course you did, because we didn't tell you. So we're not going to allow this assumption. We're going to actually tell you what's in the scope. And also then establishing early on how often we need to collaborate, how often we need to meet, and how often updates will happen, and also how decisions will be made. I mean, if this is a bigger project, so something that isn't just like a simple campaign, maybe it's a big strategic product launch, for example, how often do we need to go through milestones in this project timeline? How often do we need to come together as a collective team, marketing and other departments? How often do we need to make decisions to move to the next stage in the process? If you can get buy-in from your stakeholders at this early stage, they feel part of the process. They don't feel like they were just asked to join at the last minute, subservient in the project. They feel like the project is theirs. That's really key here. And what it enables you to do then is to kind of move away from kind of having priorities and preferences all just bundled into this kind of this noise within a project. It allows you to separate priorities from preferences. And often, because stakeholders often present preferences as urgent requirements, and you know this, everybody wants things right here, right now. They never told you that that's what was going to happen, but it was just dropped on your table at the last minute, 4 o'clock on a Friday, and it's like, oh, can I have this before the weekend? It's like, hold on a minute, I've still got stuff I'm finishing off, and now you tell me it's urgent. Well, that was a lack of stakeholder engagement. They should have told you, you should have enabled them to know that this is what my priorities are right now. And so basically what you need to do, really working collaboratively with stakeholders, your top priority ones, is to be very clear about your priorities as much as you understanding their priorities. And I would always suggest using the must, should, could model. So things that must have or must be included in the priorities, things that should. So once we've done all the musts, these things should actually be included. And then the coulds. Well, if we do have a little bit of spare time, these things could be included. And again, agreeing collectively what is actually a priority. Because if you decide, well, these are the must-haves, and actually the stakeholders around you say, well, not in my view, because I think these that you've put into the should, these are musts. Because from my angle, my perspective, if these things don't happen, the thing's going to fall apart, and there's something you've overlooked. So having those conversations and literally sitting down to work through these things with your stakeholders, you will see a game-changing level of relationship evolve. So, so powerful, this stuff, if you can get it right. And then from that, you've kind of got the groundwork done. You've got those foundations for a successful management of those stakeholders into this project or campaign. So now you can build your communication plan. I mean, an effective stakeholder comms plan is going to include the objectives, it's going to include audience, channels, roles, timeline, feedback mechanisms. It's a typical comms plan that you would do for an external audience. It is pretty much no different. And a comms plan like this, again, working with stakeholders who probably do know you quite well by now, will enable you to reduce ambiguity, support better decision making as you go, because things will change inevitably as you go forward, and to keep everybody aligned to common goals. And it's that phrase, common goals, that is absolutely clear. It's so, so important. And we'll come on to kind of what that means, this single point of truth, in just a moment. Because what it'll allow you to do is if you've got common goals and you know the level of interest because of the stakeholder mapping and because of the conversations that you've had, you then know as you're starting to engage with them through the project or through the team meetings that you then have, is that you will know that not all stakeholders need the same level of detail. They don't, obviously, and they don't want it in the same kind of form. So you need to decide the right mix of, is it weekly updates, milestone reviews? Is it just kind of general notes and bullet points? Or is it live decision meetings? You've got to get the mix right. And it doesn't mean that if somebody just wants some little asynchronous notes just as things happen, just to be kept up to date, that doesn't mean that they're not a priority stakeholder. It doesn't mean that the ones who want to keep up to date all the time with you, they want these live meetings with you, that they're a higher priority. No, this is the decision-making route for you to do that enables you to play back the progress and the information and the interaction that you need with each stakeholder through a channel of communication that's appropriate for them. So this is kind of what I was working towards when I was saying earlier. You've got to understand what they need and what they want. So it's a really important step in the whole process, that one. But what it does, and this is this point about this single source of truth, if there's one thing I would encourage you to remember from this talk here today, it is this, that if you've got a single source of truth and you are working across a diverse range of different stakeholders who have different priorities, different levels of influence, different levels of interest, if you've got a single source of truth, you are going to make your life so much easier. Disconnected documents, disconnected updates will create confusion and missing information for everybody. It's hard to manage as well. If you, when I'm talking about different channels of communication, that is the delivery mechanism, that's the delivery method. It's not this single source of truth. So what I'm suggesting here, and there's a lot of research behind this that says that this is actually the preferred approach to stakeholder communication, is that if you can hold one central location for project documents, for updates, for feedback, decision making, milestones, the templates that you're working to, the kind of the goals that you've collectively agreed, and especially when you're working across multiple discipline teams, then you're going to make your life easier because it means that you've got reduced rework because you know where to go to be able to get the latest versions of everything, as do other people. It makes your decisions easier to trace back if something doesn't work out and you have to go back up through the crumb trail to actually solve stuff. Then it means you've got a single source of truth. It reduces ambiguity. It just means that no matter how you deliver the updates or the work with people, you're actually working to something that is a common sort of, central point of this project or this campaign. That is absolutely key. So that is one thing I would suggest is your number one thing after you've done your stakeholder mapping is decide where is my single source of truth. And of course, let all your stakeholders know, give them appropriate access. Some will have admin rights to that, some will have read only. You can decide. And then you can improve your update formats, knowing how people want to receive the information through the mechanism or through the channel that they want it. There is this single source of truth. You've got this common goal. You've negotiated the terms of engagement and the relationship that you want with this stakeholder and with each one, particularly the high priority ones. So now you've got a really effective mechanism, process, and relationship or set of relationships that will enable you to continuously improve the updating of the progress of the project. And you can keep people close or at a more of a distance, depending on the level of stakeholder engagement that you've mapped. So you're starting to see now how these things start to come together and they start to kind of move forward in the project with you. Now, there will be some stakeholders who maybe are kind of on the periphery. They're really important for a reason or reasons that you can decide. And often these are senior stakeholders. So they might be somebody or a number of people in maybe the management team, or it could be the chief exec, or it could be somebody who is senior, just needs to be made aware of the progress of your projects or the progress of your marketing activities. And they usually want they basically want short, simple updates. So what they want is if there's any kind of things that potentially are going outside of the expected outcome. So if something is going a little off kilter, a little bit out of kind of sync with the project that you'd set out to do, what they want to know is the situation, the complication. They want to know what question you're asking, but they also want an answer. They want to know, what are you going to deal with? How are you going to solve this thing? Don't come to me with a problem, come to me with a solution. And I'm sure you've heard this and seen this and probably have felt this yourself, maybe, if you're in that kind of a role, is you don't want to be presented with, oh, look, this is a big problem here in the project. You want to be presented with, okay, that's fine. There's a problem here. Okay, so what do you want to do about it? And of course, that's where these relationships now that you have with these other disciplines, these other professionals in the business now, your stakeholders who you've now engaged with in a much more successful way, they can start to become your allies. They can start to come in and problem solve. So you can then start to lead with conclusions, start to lead with solutions, and then reverse engineer back to what you then have to do about it. So what you're doing is you're keeping these senior stakeholders up to date with your solving, with your kind of resolution of a particular challenge, rather than just reporting negativity and problems. You become a very valuable ally and very valuable asset to the business by doing it that way. So there's something a little bit political, but there's something very positive in terms of both mindset, but also the way you are going to be perceived. And then ultimately, of course, how marketing is going to be perceived in the business. You're the good guys, you're the good guys to work with, and everybody else now is shouting your praises. This is the kind of level that we want to get to. But of course, as things go through our projects and our campaigns, what we'll find very clearly is that not everything's going to go right. I've painted quite a rosy, positive picture here, but of course, some things will not work out as they would. So you are going to need to revisit your stakeholder plans as things change, as the project direction changes, as unexpected things arise, or of course, if you've established a great relationship with a particular individual, then they leave the business or somebody else comes in, you are going to need to keep those one pages up to date. You're going to need to kind of revisit the individuals and get some feedback from them, almost these kind of ongoing reviews with your key stakeholders, just maybe meeting for a coffee and having a chat and saying, how's things going from your side of things? This is how I'm sort of feeling we're getting on and how things are progressing, but what about you? And that will hopefully now, because you've got a strong relationship, start to uncover maybe further development opportunities and things that you can do. So revisiting your plans as things change is really important. And of course, from that, you might find that there are some negatives. There might be some resistance. And of course, solving that with listening before just trying to convince people, as we know from really effective communication and relationship building anyway, is a great starting point. So if you have, or you find there's a little bit of resistance, or things aren't now quite as good as they were a couple of months back, something isn't quite right, it often signals a need, a fear, or an unresolved risk. Maybe there was something they didn't tell you. Maybe there was something that's cropped up for them that you're not aware of. So listening, active listening is absolutely key here. Because if you begin to listen to their worries, their expectation, and their desires, you will begin to understand the things that you can do to bring back into that relationship a problem solving approach. Because that is actually what we're looking to do here, this collaboration, co-creation, and actively listening. Hopefully by this point, you've got a relationship that's worth investing in. And as I say, even if it is just having a chat over a coffee or just getting it onto a quick Teams meeting, just to kind of see how things are going and see if you can be a good kind of buddy, if you like, from a different team to maybe help them solve their kind of challenges that might be going on in their world. That is often a great way of sort of positioning not only you, but as marketing as a really true ally. And doing this by building consistency. This is not something, even though I said at the start that the stakeholder mapping is probably a one-time activity and you can adapt it and tune it. But what we're looking for here is to build trust through consistency. If you can do this on an ongoing basis and make this part of your daily work, so reviewing goals, key events, frequently increasing the credibility, with the interactions you have with stakeholders and senior management, this is the way to build the trust and confidence. Proper communication in this kind of consultative relationship way of building your relationships with other people and other teams. This is all about them really feeling that you're the safe pair of hands. You're reliable. You're trustworthy. You don't share stuff that they told you in confidence and kind of just go out and blab it all around the business. You're the good guys. That's the way that you can build this trust through being a really consistent player in the game. And I don't say game in terms of, your game playing, but it is about plotting out this thing as both a strategy and tactics. And it's the small stuff that really matters. And I'm sure you're kind of feeling this at the moment, is that this is about human relationships. Managing stakeholders is a little bit theoretical at the start to kind of set the scene, but then it's into the detail. Then it's into building the more subjective interactions that you have. And by doing that, you're going to spot any early signs of either discomfort, of things not quite going to plan or change. That is the thing that you're going to be watching out for. Because if you see signals such as, sign-offs get delayed, suddenly there's a bit of an objection to something that should have just gone sailing through. Maybe you've put some updates out and you don't get any feedback, and there's silence. Maybe requests start changing and you're not sure why. There could be some conflicting messages coming down from different leaders in the business, or maybe there's starting, to sort of feel a little bit uneasy and you're getting these repeated requests for reassurance about what you're doing, or can you give me a little bit more data to back up that next piece of decision making that we need to do. All of these things can show that there are gaps in expectations. There are gaps in the relationship beginning to evolve. And those are the things that you can see really as early warning signs that something in the relationship is unsaid. Something is kind of taking you both kind of off, away from this single point of truth, away from maybe these combined goals that you've set at the start. Something is awry. So watch out for those early signs, because if you can nip those in the bud, the relationship can come back to what it was and what you'd created. So that's really key. So let's start to kind of, put this together as a little bit of a plan. Got a couple more things to share with you here. So your stakeholder management plan. So if you're now sort of creating this as a kind of a strategic document, as it were, if you've got your stakeholder list, You've got your power interest map. So that's your stakeholder mapping. Maybe you've done a salience check to see kind of which ones may be building in things like urgency into that. So you've got a nice list prioritized of all of your stakeholders. You might want to keep that one close to your chest because obviously if somebody sees themselves down at the bottom of the list, they might not feel too good about that. So that might be something that, you just keep a little bit of a sort of a lock and key on that one. But then you're going to create your one pages for your priority stakeholders and those details that I suggested before. Any decision rights, any communication cadence, in other words, how often these people want to be kind of interacting with you, that's all in there. The update format and of course, a review of any trigger points or any early warning signs. So you can obviously keep notes of how that relationship starts to build over time. And maybe just rate it. Maybe it's a red, amber, green kind of thing. Green is like, yeah, we're absolutely on target with, to where we want to get to. Amber is, yeah, we're doing okay. I just sense something's not quite right. And then red is, no, I've got to get in and see them next week because we've got to have a conversation because things are kind of, stalling a bit. So maybe a red, amber, green kind of traffic light scheme could be quite useful there. But keeping that alive as a little plan is going to be a really great way of ensuring that you are interacting on an ongoing basis with your stakeholders in the most appropriate way. And then how about breaking that down then into a practical 30-day action plan? So let's see over the next 30 days whether or not we can build this thing. Obviously, we're all busy, we've all got stuff to do, but wouldn't it be nice if we could surround ourselves with allies? Maybe we can break down some of those barriers that have existed before. So maybe over the next 30 days, we see week one is identify the stakeholders, map their influence and interest, and write these one-page summaries. Maybe week two then is clarifying the objectives, the scope, and success measures, and then maybe look to kind of surface some maybe hidden expectations through having some conversations. So you start to get to know them a little bit better. Maybe week three is you launch a comms plan. So you start to actually update your stakeholders with the stuff that you've got going on. Maybe then you begin to centralize the documents and the decisions. Remember that single point of truth. That's a key one here. And then maybe standardize the update format. So get some templates together from the way that people are then receiving the information that you're sharing with them. Again, listen to how they and check how they actually receive it and how they perceive it. And if they like what they see, maybe those then become this standardized update format. So you've got your templates then for going forward. And then maybe in week four, the final of the 4 weeks of our 30-day action plan, you start to review the trust, responsiveness, risks. Maybe you hold one listening conversation, if you think of that, with maybe a difficult stakeholder or a trickier one. Again, you can choose who that person is, but maybe go for it and just try a different technique and then adjust the plan, obviously, where you need to. And so by that point, you should hopefully have a very clear view of who you need to be building relationships with. At the very, very best, you're going to be able to do this right across the organization. At the very worst, you've got a really clear view of how your marketing is impacting on others in the business, who you need to update, with the most important stuff, but also how you can build very, very influential and very valuable relationships with those others in the business who maybe you hadn't encountered before, or you knew by name, you'd nod at them in the corridor, but you wouldn't get into a conversation. Well, now maybe you're actually building a group of allies who, if anything did crop up for you that was a bit more challenging, you could actually call on. Wouldn't that be good and interesting? That could be a very helpful way of building marketing expertise, building marketing capability, and also the way that marketing is perceived within the business. So just some final reflections for you here. Hopefully by now you've seen that stakeholder management is a core marketing capability. You get this right, your marketing can fly. If you ignore this, you are going to be doing marketing in an ivory tower and everything is going to feel like an uphill battle. So there's always a win-win by taking this approach. And of course, when expectations are really clear, when communication is planned and decisions are documented, your work becomes easier to explain, easier to defend, and of course, much easier and more collaboratively to improve. So I'm going to just leave you with one little reflection here. What stakeholder or which stakeholder conversation are you going to schedule first after this session? And maybe it's one that could be a trickier one. I'll leave you with that thought. I'm not going to judge you if you don't, and I'm not going to say, oh, it should have been somebody over there or it should be this person. You'll know. You'll know which stakeholder would actually probably bring you and them most value if you were to maybe invite them for a coffee or just have that Teams call or maybe just start to map out their priorities and listen to them as you want to take this whole thing forward. And that is managing stakeholders and internal expectations. I hope you found that useful, and I look forward to hosting another of these Cambridge Marketing College webinars with you, hopefully attending very, very soon. And if you want to see the upcoming schedule, if you go over to marketingcollege.com/events, and you'll see all of the next topics that we have available for you.